2 years after burying her husband, she received a call from the hospital. "Mrs. Money, I'm sorry, but your husband is in the emergency room. Please come right away." She froze. How could that be when she was the one who laid him to rest? This isn't a story about miracles. It's about love and the people who dare to survive for it. Chicago nights in autumn always carried that strange mix of damp and cold, as if the wind off Lake Michigan swept through the city with all its loneliness. On the 8th floor of Sacred Heart Hospital, the pale fluorescent light reflected off Beth Monroe's tired face. She had been working 14 hours straight, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look almost like she belonged here, a ghost wandering the sterile halls. The night shift in the ER was always the same: sirens, antiseptic smells, groans, the steady beeping of monitors. But what truly drained Beth wasn't just the work, the emptiness that followed her beyond the hospital doors. Out there, her mother lay alone in a small South Side apartment, breathing through a tube, waiting for her daughter's nightly call to hear her voice. Beth chose between a few hours of sleep and another paid daily shift. She washed her hands under cold water and stared at her reflection hair tied tight, a faint streak of dried blood on her collar, eyes so firm they startled even her. For a brief moment, she remembered when she dreamed of becoming a writer. At 20, sitting by the dorm window, she had believed the world held a place for her words. Then her mother fell ill, her father left, and everything collapsed like a sudden storm. Now, the only thing she wrote was patient notes. A siren wailed in the distance, pulling her back to the present. The ER doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, a stretcher, blood soaked through the man's grey shirt, trailing down from a gash on his forehead. "Car accident. Unconscious for 3 minutes. Regained consciousness en route," one said, panting. Beth slipped on her gloves, voice steady and professional. "Head trauma. Blood pressure 110/70. Heart rate 92. She leaned closer and froze. The man's face, beneath the bruises and blood, was that of someone who had once lived well. Clean skin, refined features, now dirtied and swollen. His eyelids fluttered open, dazed. Beth lifted her penlight and asked softly, "What's your name? Can you hear me?" He met her gaze, and in that instant, the panic left his eyes. His voice was hoarse, slow. "Beth." She blinked. "What?" he repeated, clearer this time. "Your name." "Beth." Beth frowned, wondering if she had misheard. "You know me." He gave a faint smile before losing consciousness again. All night, that moment replayed in her mind. She'd seen thousands of patients, from the homeless to the rich, but none had unsettled her like this one. He looked at her, as if they'd met before, as if something unfinished lingered between them. When his wounds were stitched and vitals stabilized, she reviewed his chart. "James Franklin," she read quietly. The name sounded familiar, maybe from TV. Franklin Industries is the city's biggest real estate empire. She dismissed the thought. That world had nothing to do with hers. Around 4 a.m., when things finally calmed, Beth returned to his room. He was awake, lying on his side, eyes on the faint snow outside the window. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better, though my head feels like someone's pounding on it." She nodded. "The stitches will hold. You need rest. I'm the nurse on duty tonight." "My name's Beth," he interrupted with a weak smile. "I know." She hesitated. "You read my name tag?" "No. I just knew." Beth chuckled, trying to hide her unease. "You've had a head injury. Hallucinations are normal." "Maybe," he murmured, eyes still on her. "Or maybe I knew your name before I woke up." The air shifted. Beth's chest tightened, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar. She turned away, writing in his chart, keeping her voice steady. "You should rest. The doctor will check on you in the morning." "Thank you, Beth." She didn't answer. As the door closed behind her, she could still hear his quiet voice, almost dreaming. "Meeting you might be the best thing that happened tonight." That line followed her all the way home. Morning light glimmered on the snow-covered streets. Sitting on the bus with a cheap cup of coffee, Beth's thoughts tangled. Who was this man, James Franklin? And why did her heart race for the first time in years? At home, she changed clothes and checked on her mother, who lay frail in bed, eyes half closed, lips dry, the oxygen tube humming softly. Beth kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm home, Mom." Her mother smiled faintly. "Another night shift?" "Yeah. You need to sleep, Elizabeth." "You're not made of steel." Beth smiled, sitting by the bed, holding her mother's hand. "I'm fine. Had an interesting case tonight. A man. He woke up and called my name." Her mother opened her eyes. "Maybe the world still holds a bit of magic." Beth shook her head. "No, Mom. He probably just hit his head too hard." But when she closed her eyes, James Franklin's tired smile came back, clear as day. 3 nights later, Beth was back on shift. His file was still in the cabinet. She glanced at it again. Car accident. No passengers. No family contact. Strange. How could a man from the Franklin family have no one looking for him? Around midnight, a soft knock broke the silence. Beth looked up. James stood there, wearing a patient gown and holding a cup of coffee. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "Escaping my room to thank the nurse who saved me." "Thank her and get back to bed, Mr. Franklin." "Call me Jim," he said, voice low but warm. "Mr. Franklin sounds too formal." Beth crossed her arms, tilting her head. "Still have that headache?" "A little, but clear enough to ask if you'd share a coffee with me." She sighed, nodding toward the old coffee machine. "I'm on duty, and hospital coffee is terrible." "Then let me make it. I used to be a barista in college." Beth laughed the first time in days. "A Franklin heir serving coffee?" "Exactly. My mother never knew. If she did, she'd faint." For reasons she couldn't explain, she let him stay. They sat across each other in the quiet hallway, yellow light spilling around them. The coffee steamed, its scent mingling oddly with disinfectant, but somehow it felt comforting. Jim asked softly, "Why the night shift?" Beth took a sip, eyes distant. "Day shifts cost too much, and at night, no one sees how tired you are." "What about writing? I saw you studied literature." Beth paused. "You read my file?" "Just the public part." "I was curious. Now I see why you crashed your car." "Too curious." They both laughed lightly, almost tenderly. Then Jim spoke slower, voice lower. "I used to think I had everything. But that night, when the car spun out, all I thought was, if I die, will anyone truly remember me?" Beth looked at him. "And do you think they would?" "No. Not until I woke up and saw you." The silence that followed was heavy. Beth finally whispered, "Don't say that. I'm just a nurse doing her job." "Maybe. But sometimes the one who saves you isn't the doctor, the person who makes you want to live again." 1 second. 2. The world seemed to stop. Beth stood, avoiding his gaze. "You should rest, Jim. I have patients to check." "Beth. See you later if you promise not to make coffee that awful again." She walked away, heart pounding. The door shut softly behind her, and Beth knew something in her life had quietly changed forever. When her shift ended, the first light of dawn touched the snow. She stood on the hospital steps, wind biting her cheeks, eyes lifted to the pale sky. Somewhere on the 8th floor, James Franklin was still asleep, maybe thinking of her. And for the first time in years, Beth felt she wasn't just surviving another day. She was waiting to see where destiny might take her next. Chicago gleamed under the sun that morning, but the air was so cold that every breath turned to mist. Beth hurried down 5th Street, clutching a steaming cup of coffee she'd bought from a corner cart, her heart tangled in curiosity and unease. She wasn't sure what she was doing there, standing in front of Brennan's cafe, where a man she barely knew had invited her for real coffee, not the hospital kind. Jim Franklin was already seated by the window, with a grey sweater and slightly messy hair, his posture relaxed. His eyes were counting every second. When Beth walked in, the bell above the door chimed softly. He looked up immediately. A faint smile flickered across his lips, warm as late autumn sunlight. "You came," he said, voice low and slightly rough. Beth pulled out a chair. "Don't flatter yourself. I'm here because I got curious." "Curiosity," he said with a half grin, "is the start of every good thing." The coffee at Brennan's wasn't anything special, but mixed with the soft hum of old jazz, it felt different somehow. Outside, people hurried past. Inside, it was just them two strangers trying to find a reason not to leave. Jim talked about his college years in Boston, long nights reading Sylvia Plath in his dorm, and how he once dreamed of becoming a literature professor until his father laughed at him. He said, "I wasn't born to teach people. I was born to control them." Beth listened quietly, only smiling now and then. "What about you?" he asked. "Nothing interesting. I used to study writing. Then Mom got sick. I dropped out and became a nurse. Since then, My life's been hospitals and that old apartment. Do you regret it? Beth looked out the window, where the first snowflakes began to fall. Yes, but regret doesn't change anything. Jim nodded slowly. Maybe not. But it reminds us what we once wanted. Something in that line made Beth look at him longer. In the warm light pouring through the glass, his face looked real, tired, human, not like the kind of man who wanted to conquer the world, but someone trying to remember who he used to be. Aren't you afraid I'm only here because of your money? She asked, half teasing. Jim chuckled. I used to think everyone came to me for that. Until you didn't. Maybe I just came to prove you wrong. That's fine. Whatever the reason, I'm still glad you did. They talked about movies, winter, and loneliness. When the music shifted to Moon River, Beth went quiet for a while, then asked softly, Do you ever worry you'll die and leave nothing behind? Jim blinked. That's a strange question. I see people like that every day. They die, and no one even remembers their names. I'm afraid one day my mom will die, then me, and no one will ever know we existed, Jim said gently. Then I'll remember for you. Beth laughed, ready with a comeback, but his tone was so sincere it caught in her throat. Outside, melting snow traced watery lines down the glass, reflecting their silhouettes, two people suspended in a moment that felt like escape. Her phone buzzed. A call from the hospital, short-staffed again. She sighed and stood. I have to go. My shift's starting early. Jim nodded, eyes lingering as if reluctant to let her go. Let me give you a ride. No need. I'll take the bus. At least let me pay for the coffee. No, my treat. That way you won't think I'm after Franklin money. He burst out laughing, then said softly as she turned to leave, If I make terrible coffee again, you'll come back to fix it, won't you? Beth didn't look back, but the corner of her lips lifted just a little. The door closed, the bell chimed, and Jim sat there staring at the ring of warmth her cup had left behind. He'd never met anyone who made the world around him feel so real. From that day on, something changed in Beth's night shifts. Not because the hospital became any easier, but because she realized she was waiting for a message, a glance, or a cup of bad coffee from someone who made her feel alive. Jim showed up 3 times the following week. The first time, with coffee for her at the hospital. The second was to accidentally run into her in the cafeteria. And the third, when he waited in the hallway after her shift, holding a box of donuts and a pair of tired eyes. Don't you have anything better to do? Beth asked, half amused, half scolding. I do, he said, but this is more fun. They sat in the dim break room, the sound of a ventilator humming from the next ward. Jim talked little, mostly watching her, occasionally sharing small stories. Beth tried to keep her distance, but when he went quiet, she felt the silence too sharply. Once, when he dozed off in a chair, head tilted to the side, she watched him. The small scar on his forehead hadn't fully healed. The soft light made his face look peaceful, almost fragile. Beth realized she was smiling, then turned away quickly, whispering to herself, It's just a passing feeling. But one night, Jim stopped as they walked down the quiet 8th-floor hallway. The neon lights flickered above. I'm getting discharged soon, he said softly. Will you have coffee with me again without the smell of antiseptic this time? Beth smiled faintly. I'll think about it. I already have, he replied. Something in his tone made her heart stutter. They stood by the window, watching the snow settle over the city skyline. Do you ever think Chicago is beautiful? He asked. Beautiful? I only ever find it cold. Cold can be beautiful too if you have someone to walk through it with. Beth didn't answer. She looked out at the falling snow, which was hazy and far away. Then she turned to him and said quietly, If you really want that coffee, tomorrow at 7, Brennan's. Don't be late. Jim smiled, eyes bright like a child finally allowed to dream. Not a second late. The next morning, Beth arrived. Jim was already there. Instead of coffee, there was an old notebook on the table. I want you to have this, he said. Beth opened it, handwritten pages filled with poems and unfinished paragraphs. You wrote these? I used to. Then I stopped. Now I want you to keep it because I think you'll understand it better than I do. Beth flipped through, stopping at a line that read, If anyone asks, I'll say I found the most beautiful thing on an ordinary night. She looked up at him. A quiet moment stretched between them, the world holding its breath. You know, Jim, she said softly, you scare me. He smiled faintly. Why's that? I'm afraid I'll start believing you're real one day. He said nothing for a while, then smiled, gentle, a little sad. "And I'm afraid you'll keep thinking this is all just a dream." They sat there in silence. Sunlight spilled through melting snow, scattering into small, glittering rays. Beth watched them and, for the first time in years, wondered if maybe beauty had always been there, she'd just been too tired to notice. As she was leaving, Jim called out, "Beth." She turned. "If I told you I don't believe in destiny, would you believe me?" She smiled. "No, because maybe destiny is standing right in front of me." Jim smiled back. That line stayed with them for the rest of the day, and perhaps for the rest of their lives. The Chicago night was cold again, as if winter wanted to bind every restless soul in its grip. From the 8th floor of Sacred Heart Hospital, the city lights flickered like shattered stars swallowed by fog. The wind carried the metallic scent of snow, the sterile tang of disinfectant, and the distant wail of sirens echoing from the streets below. Beth stood on the rooftop, a thin coat wrapped around her, hands cupping a steaming mug of coffee. She wasn't sure why she had come, only that Jim had texted, "Come to the roof, I have something to show you." So she'd walked silently, climbed the narrow stairwell, past the flickering light bulbs that hummed like they might go out at any moment. When she pushed open the metal door, the wind hit her face. Jim stood near the railing, back turned, hands in his coat pockets, hair tousled by the gusts. Beside him, a small radio played "Fly Me to the Moon." "What are you doing up here?" Beth asked, her voice blending with the wind. Jim turned, a quiet smile touching his lips. "Watching the city from the highest place they'll let me stand, and hoping you'd come. You know you're not supposed to be up here. I also know I'm not supposed to think about you this much." Beth said nothing. She walked closer until they stood just a few feet apart. The city lights painted their faces half in shadow, half in gold. Jim said softly, "You ever think this city never sleeps, and yet it's lonelier than anywhere else?" Beth answered, "Loneliness doesn't need to be taught. It just is." He chuckled lightly. "That sounds like poetry. It's just the truth." Silence fell. The wind grew harsher, tugging the scarf from around her neck. Jim stepped forward, caught it, and gently wrapped it back around her shoulders, careful, almost reverent. "You're cold," he murmured. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I want to." They stood side by side, the music drifting between them, lights shimmering in the distance. Jim pointed out toward the skyline. "See that tower? My father owns 3 floors there, one for the gym, one for his art collection, and one for drinking alone." Beth smiled faintly. "Sounds fancy. It's just lonely. Nobody talks to each other in that world." She looked at him. "You hate your family that much?" He paused for a few seconds, then said quietly, "No, I hate living in a box they built for me where I don't have to love anyone, please them." A sharp gust spilled a few drops of coffee from her cup. Beth set it down on the ledge, clutching her coat tighter. "And you, Beth, do you have your own box?" She smiled faintly. "I do, but no one built it for me. I made it myself out of duty and fear. My mother, she needs me. I owe her my life." Jim looked at her, eyes steady. "Then who do you live for, besides her?" She didn't answer. The wind swept strands of hair across her face, but she stayed silent. They stood there for a long time. The city glowed beneath them. Above, only 2 people, a bit of music, and a thin line of distance neither dared to cross. Jim finally said, "If you could, would you live another life?" "No one really gets to choose, Jim." "Yes, we do. We're just afraid to." The words hung in the air, hitting something deep inside her. Beth turned away, trying to hide what flickered across her face. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," he said, stepping closer, his voice low, warm. "All I know is out of all the faces in this endless night, I just wanted to see yours again." For a moment, everything stopped. She turned toward him. Their eyes met. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, he leaned in and kissed her, gently, hesitant, as if afraid he might wake from a dream. The world fell away. There was only breath, heartbeat, and the faint taste of coffee between them. Beth pulled back, drawing a shaky breath. "No, Jim, this can't happen." His gaze stayed on her, tender but unwavering. "Can't, or you're afraid?" "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you feel it too." Beth turned away, staring out at the blur of city lights. Her vision shimmered. She didn't even realize she was crying. "You don't understand. I can't let this go further. I have my mother, my life. I don't belong in your world. Jim stepped closer, voice rough but steady. Then I'll come to yours. Beth felt her heart pounding that fast for the first time in years. But she shook her head, retreating. Tonight ends here. Forget it ever happened. She walked toward the door without looking back. Jim stayed there, eyes fixed on her until her silhouette vanished. On the rooftop, the song kept playing. Fly me to the moon. Let me play among the stars. And in the ocean of city lights, a man stood alone, his smile fading into the wind. The next day, Beth tried to act as if nothing had happened. She buried herself in work, avoiding every hallway that might remind her of that night. But memories have their way of breaking through like light, slipping through a crack in the wall. Jim didn't call, didn't text, and it was that silence that unsettled her most. Her heart flickered each time she walked past the stairwell leading up to the roof. She wondered if he still went up there, or if he'd finally taken her words to heart and left. By Friday night, when her shift ended, the wind bit at her cheeks. She wrapped her scarf tighter and hurried toward the bus stop. Then a familiar voice called out behind her, "You always walk like the world's trying to catch up to you." She turned. Jim stood in a thick coat, with 2 cups of coffee in his hand. His face looked tired, but his eyes were bright. "What are you doing here? I told you I'd come to where you belong." Beth shook her head, half smiling in disbelief. "You still don't get it, Jim. Then make me understand." She sighed, then relented. "Fine, but only 10 minutes." They sat on a bench by the bus stop, surrounded by the hum of traffic and the damp hiss of melting snow. Jim handed her a cup. "It's bitter," he said. "I forgot the sugar, and you still brought it to me." "Yeah. You said you liked things that felt real." Beth smiled faintly, taking a sip. It wasn't enjoyable, terribly so, but somehow it warmed her more than the coat she wore. "You know," she said, "I hated bitter coffee, but now I think I like it." Jim looked at her, his eyes deep and steady. "Thank you for not walking away that night." "I did walk away." "No, you just went down the stairs. I stayed with that kiss." Beth said nothing. The wind howled around them, snow brushing their shoulders. She drew in a long breath. "You make everything harder. I'm used to being alone, used to not waiting for anyone." Jim's voice softened. "Then let me be the one who waits." That simple line stung behind her eyes. She didn't know why, maybe because she was too tired to keep fighting what she wanted most. The bus arrived. Beth stood. "I have to go." Jim rose too. "Tell me, can I see you again?" She looked at him briefly before answering quietly, "You know where I work." She stepped onto the bus. The doors closed. Jim stood outside, cup still in hand, his breath turning to mist. As the bus pulled away, Beth looked through the window. He was still there, motionless, watching. That night, back home, Beth set the cup on her table. The coffee had gone cold, but she couldn't pour it out. She sat beside her mother's bed, held her frail hand, and whispered, "Mom, some people only appear once in your life, but they change you so deeply. You can never return to who you were before." Her mother slept on, unaware, but Beth stayed there, gazing out the window where snow fell softly. Somewhere across the city, Jim might have been looking at the same sky, thinking about the same person. That February morning, Chicago lay buried under white snow. On the small kitchen table of the South Side apartment, a pregnancy test rested silently, 2 bright red lines, as clear and unshakable as fate itself. Beth sank into the chair, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She stared at the test repeatedly, as if long enough would change the result. But the 2 lines stayed there, quiet, straight, undeniable. Her hand moved to her stomach, still flat, unchanged. Everything had happened too fast. Just a week ago, she'd still been replaying the kiss on the hospital rooftop, the look in Jim's eyes, the way the world fell away when he touched her. Now, the world was silent again, but not because of love, because of fear. In the next room, her mother's breathing machine hummed softly. Outside, snowflakes thickened against the gray light. Beth sat motionless, letting panic wash through her, then empty itself. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She only knew that nothing would ever be the same from this moment on. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jim. "Shift over yet? I'm at Brennan's. Same spot. Warm coffee. Seat saved." Beth stared at the message, then turned off her screen. She needed time. She needed air. It wasn't until evening, when the sky dimmed, that she finally went. The cafe was nearly empty, and the smell of roasted beans was still familiar. Jim looked up, his face lighting when he saw her. "You had me thinking the whole city lost cell service today." Beth pressed her lips together, silent. "You okay?" he asked, sensing something different in her eyes. She drew a breath. "Jim, I have to tell you something." He smiled lightly. "That sounds serious." "It is." She set her bag down, hands trembling. "I'm pregnant." The sounds in the cafe vanished. Jim stared at her for several seconds, speechless. Then unexpectedly he smiled. Not out of relief, but something raw, almost reverent. "Are you sure?" Beth nodded, her eyes fixed on her untouched cup. "God," he whispered. "You're pregnant. That means there's a part of you and me. Here." He reached for her hand. She started to pull away, then didn't. His hand was warm and shaking. "Jim, listen." Her voice was low, urgent. "I don't know if I can do this. I have no money. My mother's sick. And you have a family, a world I don't belong in." Jim tightened his grip. "Beth, I love you. You're not outside my world. You are my world. Don't say that. I mean it. Marry me." Beth froze. "You're insane." "No," he said quietly. "I've never been more sane. Marry me, Beth." Her eyes filled. "You don't know what you're saying. You'll lose everything. Then I'll start over with you, with our child." "Jim, I'll tell them. My parents, everyone. I'm done hiding." She looked at him, his eyes steady, sure, and wanted to believe him. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "For the first time in my life," he said. They sat in that small cafe, warmth from the heater filling the space between their words. Outside, snow kept falling. Beth didn't know what the future would hold, only that when Jim held her hand, her heart stopped trembling. That night, she told her mother. The older woman was silent for a while, then squeezed her hand. "Are you afraid, Elizabeth?" Beth nodded. "Of everything. Losing my job, what people will say, what comes next." Her mother smiled faintly. "Then good. Fear means you care. And if you love the right person, fear will teach you courage." Beth buried her face against her mother's chest. She didn't know if she was brave enough, only that in the morning, Jim would drive her to the Franklin estate, and the storm would begin. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a heavy gray. Jim arrived in an old, borrowed car, not his usual polished sedan. Beth realized he was trying to make himself smaller, simpler, and that broke her heart a little. On the drive, he told small stories, how he'd once been grounded for climbing trees, the first time he got drunk at Harvard. Beth listened, but her chest felt tight. She knew what awaited them. The Franklin mansion sat by Lake Michigan, white walls, black iron gates, columns like a Greek temple. Jim's car seemed to shrink as it rolled through the entrance. "Are you sure?" she asked one last time. "I'm sure," he said, squeezing her hand. They stepped into a grand marble hall, light from the chandelier spilling across the floor. Beth's footsteps echoed like a prayer. The butler led them into a sitting room where Diane Franklin was already waiting, ivory dress, hair in a perfect knot, a glass of white wine in hand. "Hello, darling," she said, voice soft as glass. "And this must be the nurse you mentioned?" Beth nodded politely. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Franklin." "Oh, don't be formal. I've just been dying to see what my son found in such an ordinary woman." Jim's grip tightened around Beth's hand. "Mother, she's the woman I love. And she's carrying my child." Silence. Diane's face shifted from surprise to ice. She set her glass down carefully. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "She's pregnant." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Are you sure it's yours, James?" Beth went rigid. "Mother," Jim said, his voice low, "dangerous. Don't. I'm simply asking. Women like her can be opportunistic." "Mother," he snapped for the first time. Diane's expression didn't flinch. "Fine, but don't expect my blessing. This girl will never be part of this family. You don't get to decide that. I decide who walks into this house, James, and she never will." Beth stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Mrs. Franklin, I didn't come here to beg. I came because Jim wanted me to. I don't need anyone's approval." Diane arched an eyebrow. "You speak boldly for someone with so little. But let me tell you the truth, love runs out. Money doesn't." Jim took Beth's hand. "We're leaving." James. Diane's voice sliced through the air like steel. If you walk out that door, you are no longer a Franklin. He turned back, his face calm, resolute. Then today, you lose a Franklin. But I find myself. They walked out of that white mansion, through the slowly closing gates. Beth glanced back once, seeing Diane's silhouette framed by the glass slight, still, and terrifying. As the car sped away, Jim exhaled and squeezed her hand. I told you I'd keep my word, he said softly. Beth didn't speak. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from knowing that promises like his always came with a price. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "We've begun, my love. No matter how scared I am, I won't turn back." Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the city, fate began to turn its silent gears. The mansion by Lake Michigan gleamed under the afternoon Sunday. The frozen lake mirrored its white walls, making it look like an isolated palace, beautiful but lifeless. Beth stood outside the car, staring up at the marble columns. Her heart tightened. She had never been anywhere like this, a place so spotless and perfect, leaving no room for breath or warmth. Jim stepped out, circling to open her door. His eyes held quiet resolve. "For now, we'll stay here," he said. "My mother hasn't agreed, but I talked to my father. He'll let us stay, at least for a while." Beth said nothing. She didn't believe in a while in houses like this. Time didn't heal in such places. It only pressed harder on the ones too soft to bear it. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and expensive candles. A woman in black approached one of the staff, face blank, voice formal. "Mrs. Franklin is in the tea room. Mr. Franklin is in his study." Jim leaned close. "Stay calm. She can't undo what we've already chosen." They walked through a long hallway lined with oil paintings, portraits of unsmiling faces that seemed to watch them pass. When they reached the tea room, Diane Franklin sat by the window, porcelain cup in hand. She didn't look up as she spoke. "So, you've come back?" "Yes, Mother," Jim said quietly. Diane set her cup down. "I told you if you left, don't return." "Mother, we just need a few days." "A few days? For what?" "So I can get used to the idea that my son brought a downstairs girl into this house." Beth drew a deep breath, keeping her voice calm. "I didn't come to cause trouble, Mrs. Franklin. The other place isn't safe for the pregnancy." Diane turned to her, eyes like frost. "Oh? And now you're here to teach me about safety." "Mother, that's enough," Jim said, holding his temper. "No, James," she replied coolly. "I've run out of patience watching you destroy our name." From the doorway came a deeper voice. Howard Franklin entered, tall, grey suit impeccable, his presence commanding even in silence. "James," he said, "we need to talk. Alone. I'm not going anywhere without Beth." Howard's gaze landed on her. "I have nothing to say to her." "Then I have nothing to say to you without her," Jim replied. The air thickened. Diane folded her arms. "Fine," she said coldly. "Stay if you must. But don't mistake it for acceptance. She'll stay in the staff quarters downstairs. You'll stay in your room. She's a guest, not a wife." Beth wanted to protest, but Jim squeezed her hand, a slight shake of the head. "It's fine," he whispered. "Just for now." The room downstairs was dim and narrow, the ceiling low, the air heavy with dampness. A faded photo of servants from the 1950 hung on the wall. Beth brushed her hand over the clean white sheets and thought, "I've slept in worse places, but never one that felt this cold." That night, the sound of a piano drifted down from above, a soft melody, tender and heartbreakingly sad. Jim knocked gently, stepping in with 2 mugs of warm milk. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't think they'd treat you like this." Beth sat on the edge of the bed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not surprised. I'm just sorry for you. Sorry for me, because you were born in this house." Jim set the mugs down and sat beside her. "Beth, I don't care what they think. I only care about you, about our baby. I swear just a little longer, and I'll buy our place. A small house, just us." She looked at him, weary but warm. "You don't have to promise. Just don't give up." "Never," he said. He kissed her forehead. And for the first time in days, she let herself believe him, if only for the night. 3 days passed. The Franklin house stayed as cold as the lake outside. Diane ignored Beth completely, but her silence was sharper than cruelty. Each morning, a tray of food arrived downstairs, separate from the families. Beth ate alone, listening to faint laughter drifting down through the ceiling. She didn't blame them. She just felt small, too small for a house this large. One evening, Diane summoned her upstairs for dinner. Jim took her hand. "It's just dinner," he said softly. "Pretend it's normal." But Beth knew the moment she stepped into that glittering dining hall, nothing about this night would be normal. The table stretched nearly 30 feet, the silverware gleaming, candles flickering like fire trapped in crystal. Howard sat at the head, Diane across from him, and beside her, Wesley, Jim's older brother, all charm and steel. "So you're Beth," Wesley said with a thin smile. "Fascinating. I thought women like you only existed in movies." Beth replied evenly. "I used to think so too until I met your brother." Diane's lips twitched. "Confident, aren't you?" Jim cut in. "Mother, please, not tonight." "Oh, relax, James," she said. "I'm curious if she's strong enough to live with you once you lose everything. No Franklin Industries, no trust fund. Can you handle being poor?" "Yes," Jim said without hesitation. "If she's with me?" Howard set his wineglass down, voice calm but cutting. "Good. Then we'll see how long that lasts." No one spoke after that. The rest of dinner passed in silence, each bite heavy as shame. When it ended, Diane called Beth aside. "Elizabeth," she said quietly, "don't turn this into a tragedy. James might think he loves you now, but he'll tire of this soon enough. Men in this family never stay with someone beneath them." Beth met her gaze. "You might be right, but at least my child will grow up knowing his mother didn't run away because she feared what people thought." Diane faltered for the first time, then gave a small, brittle laugh. "We'll see." That night, Beth couldn't sleep. She heard voices upstairs, Jim and his mother, shouting, a crash of breaking glass. When Jim came down, his eyes were red, and his voice was hoarse. "I can't take it anymore," he said. "Tomorrow we leave. No more waiting." "Leave for where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." The next morning, they left the white mansion behind. Jim carried nothing but a few clothes and a small framed photo. As the car rolled past the iron gates, Beth glanced back. Sunlight hit the walls, turning them to gold. But she knew inside, it was all ice. She took Jim's hand, whispering, "My home isn't as grand as this, but at least it can love you." Jim squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening. "Then let's go home to yours." And so they did. Two souls left a world made of gold, searching for one that could still feel human. That night, Chicago drowned in rain. The roads along the lake glimmered under the streetlights, reflecting like shards of broken glass. Jim's old car sped through the storm, the wipers fighting the downpour, the weary engine gasping as if clinging to life. Beth sat in the passenger seat, clutching her coat tightly. Inside her, chaos. Behind them, the Franklin mansion vanished into the rain, its golden lights shrinking to distant eyes still watching them leave. Jim drove in silence, his jaw tight, gaze fixed ahead. He didn't need to speak, Beth could feel it. The weight of someone who had just burned his bridge and hadn't yet dared to look back. "Where are we going now?" she whispered. "To your place," Jim said, his voice low but steady. "Wherever you are, that's home." Beth turned to look at him. Streetlights flashed across his face, wet, tense, beautiful in its uncertainty. She knew he was scared not of poverty, but of the possibility that everything they did might be a mistake. But like her, he no longer had a road to return to. The rain had thinned to a drizzle when the car finally stopped in front of her old South Side apartment. Half the hallway lights were out, and water dripped steadily from the roof above the stairs. Jim looked around and managed a faint smile. "Not as bad as my mother would imagine." Beth let out a tired laugh. "You haven't seen the basement yet." They carried their bags upstairs. The small apartment smelled of fried oil and damp air. Her mother slept in the next room, the oxygen machine humming softly. Beth removed her coat and poured a glass of water, but her hands still shook. Jim stood in the narrow living room, looking at the faded photos on the wall. Beth as a child, her mother healthy and smiling, a graduation portrait hung slightly crooked. Everything felt simple and heartbreakingly real. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this light," Jim said quietly. "Light?" Beth looked up. "Yeah. For the first time, I'm free. Even if it's in a tiny room with a low ceiling, it's ours." Beth's eyes softened. "Freedom's a luxury, Jim." "No," he said, taking her hand. "We'll make it ordinary." She smiled through tears. "You really don't know how to be afraid, do you?" "I do," he said softly. "But I'd rather be afraid with you." They sat on the floor, backs against the rain, tapping the wind without permission. "If you wake up tomorrow and regret this?" she asked. Jim turned to her, his eyes tender. "Then I'll regret it in your arms." The words broke something inside her. For the first time in years, Beth felt truly seen, loved without permission. That night, they slept on the floor beneath an old blanket, no chandeliers, no wine, just heartbeats and breath blending in the dark. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, for the first time, there was peace. The days that followed were the beginning of a new life, one neither of them had ever known. Jim found work at a warehouse on the city's outskirts. He told no one his full name, just James F. Hands once used to holding pens now lifted heavy crates, raw, cracked, and bleeding. Each evening, he returned, exhausted but smiling as Beth opened the door. "I'm still alive," he joked. Beth glanced at his bruised hands, her heart aching. "Don't push yourself so hard. I don't want you to break before we even begin." He shook his head. "For the first time, I feel alive, Beth. Nobody's paying for my oxygen anymore." Beth picked up an extra morning cleaning shift, then her night job at the hospital. The pregnancy made her tire easily, but she hid it, afraid they'd force her to stop working. Each night she sat by her mother's bedside, telling stories about Jim, how his clothes smelled of oil and rain, how he counted coins carefully at the grocery store. Her mother smiled faintly. "You found a man who's afraid of happiness. Those are the ones who know how to keep it." Beth lowered her eyes. "I'm scared he'll get tired of all this." "No, Elizabeth, you're not tiring him. You're teaching him how to live." Beth held her mother's fragile hand, afraid that if she let go, everything might fall apart. That evening, Jim came home late. His shirt was dusty, hair damp, eyes tired, but in his hand was a small bundle of wildflowers, their petals crushed by the cold. "For you," he said, breath uneven. Beth laughed softly. "You picked flowers in this weather? They reminded me of you, strong and growing where nobody looks." She hugged him tightly. Even in their poverty, that moment felt rich. But reality doesn't stay kind for long. Bills began piling up. Medical costs rose. The due date loomed closer, and Beth lay awake every night, staring at the ceiling, doing the math repeatedly. One night, while Jim slept, she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, bills, debts, prescriptions. The dim lamp made the ink blur through her tears. Jim stirred, then walked over, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You don't have to carry this alone. You don't understand," she whispered. "It's all too much. I'm scared." He held her tighter. "I'm scared too, but if we're both scared and still holding on, that's winning." Beth turned to face him, eyes wet. "You don't know it, Jim, but you're saving me." He kissed her forehead gently. "And you're saving me from a life that never meant anything." They stayed like that until dawn, no words, no promises, just silence and warmth. Because sometimes, love isn't in grand vows or miracles. It's in two worn hands that still choose to hold on, no matter how loud the storm outside. That spring came late. The snow melted slowly, leaving puddles of cold water on the sidewalks and patches of grass too tired to turn green again. Inside the small South Side apartment, the chill still crept through the cracked window frame, yet somehow, Beth and Jim managed to keep the warmth alive with a cheap pot of tea, a dim yellow bulb, and each other's breath. Jim had grown used to the warehouse job. He worked the early shift, waking at 4:30 to catch the bus to the outskirts. Once soft and pale, his hands were rough, blistered, darkened by the Sunday. Some days, he came home covered in rust and dust, his shoulders aching too much to lift. But every time he saw Beth open the door, smiling that familiar smile, "You're home," the pain vanished. Beth was 7 months along now. Her belly was round and heavy, her steps slower, her breath shorter. Still, she refused to stop her night shifts at the hospital. "If I take leave now, they'll never let me back," she said, her voice firm. Jim knew she was right. But each time he saw her struggle to stand, something inside him twisted. At night, when Beth was working, Jim cared for her mother. He learned how to change oxygen tanks, wipe her skin, measure blood pressure, and sometimes sit and listen. "You know, James," Mrs. Monroe said one evening, voice frail but bright, "my Beth never knew what it meant to be gentle. She was born fighting." "I know," Jim replied softly, "and that's exactly why I love her." The older woman smiled. "If you ever make her cry, I'll come back and haunt you. Jim laughed, but the words stayed in his chest, half warmth, half fear. When Beth had a day off, they walked to the flea market every Sunday morning. No car, just a 2-kilometer walk through the city chill. They bought old vegetables, day-old bread, and sometimes a used book to read together at night. Jim liked reading aloud, his voice low and husky. One evening, he read Ada Limon's The Carrying. I didn't choose this life, but I still prefer to love it. Beth smiled, hand resting on her belly. That sounds like us. Jim looked up. No, that is us. They had little money but plenty of moments. Dinner was noodles and greens, but they laughed. When the power went out, they lit candles and told stories. When it rained, they opened the window and pretended they were by the sea. Sometimes Jim sketched her face on scrap paper, not pretty like in portraits, but tender, alive. I want to draw you the way I see you, he said, not the way the world does. In those days, Beth began to believe that happiness didn't need to be loud. It lived in minor things, the warmth of a shoulder, the roughness of his hands, the quiet knowing that those same hands were holding her world together. But poverty never stays kind for long. In May, her mother's health worsened. The coughing fits returned, this time streaked with blood. The medical bills doubled. Beth sold her only piece of jewelry, a silver ring from her father, before he left to pay the hospital. Jim started working night shifts at the warehouse. He came home at dawn, collapsing onto the floor with his back aching, but always said, "I'm fine." Beth knew better. Every fine was a gentle lie meant to protect her. One afternoon, while tidying her mother's room, Beth found an envelope in the closet, $300 inside and a note, "For you, my child, so you won't struggle so much." "Mom!" Beth rushed to her bedside, tears spilling. "Mom, where did you get this?" Her mother smiled weakly. "I sold my wedding ring." "Why would you do that?" "Because you need it more than I do." That night, Beth couldn't sleep. She sat between the two people she loved most, her mother breathing softly, Jim asleep on the chair across the room, his face gaunt in the weak light, and realized, love doesn't save you from poverty. It just makes poverty less frightening. The next morning, as Jim put on his jacket, Beth stopped him. "Jim," he turned. "Yeah? I think the baby should take my last name." He froze. "Beth, it's not because I don't want it to have yours. I don't want anyone using your name to hurt it. Our child won't be a Franklin. It'll be a Monroe." Jim was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then his name will be Timothy Monroe, and he'll know his father's proud of that." Beth smiled faintly. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. That name is our freedom." So they chose it, Timothy. A name that sounded like spring, something that could survive the storm. As the weeks passed, Beth felt every movement inside her. Each kick was life itself. Every night, Jim pressed his hand against her belly, eyes wide with wonder. "He kicked me. That's because he always hears your voice." Beth laughed. "I hope he likes my songs too." "You sing?" Jim grinned. "Not really. I whistle. But I think he gets it." Then came the final night of June. Beth's mother was fading fast, her breath shallow, words barely a whisper. She called Beth close and said, "You have to keep living, Elizabeth. Whatever happens, don't let love be the reason you fall." Beth's eyes filled. "Don't talk like that." Her mother smiled. "I know my time's near, but I'm not afraid. You found someone who loves with his hands, not just his words." She closed her eyes, the morning light spilling gold across the room. And Beth understood, even in loss, even in poverty, her mother had seen the rarest kind of fortune. Love, still alive. In this small, fragile home, summer arrived in Chicago with suffocating heat. The buildings seemed to sweat. Car horns echoed endlessly, and the air clung sticky to every inch of skin. Beth was 9 months pregnant now, heavy, slow, but still working. "Just a few more days," she told herself. "Then everything will change." But she didn't know those days would draw the line between life and death. That afternoon, the hospital was unusually crowded. A multi-car crash had sent a wave of patients flooding in. Beth took an extra shift, despite the doctor's warning to rest. "I'm only doing paperwork," she smiled faintly. "No lifting, I promise." But by 8 p.m., while filling out a file, a sharp pain clenched her stomach. At first, it was a dull ache, then waves of agony, steady and rising. Beth gripped the desk, breathing hard. Anurse rushed over, alarmed. Beth, are you in labor? No. No. It's too soon. But before she could finish, her water broke, spreading across the tile floor. Everything blurred into chaos. They lifted her onto a gurney, rushing through the halls. All delivery rooms were full. She had to wait. Meanwhile, Jim was at the warehouse, unaware his phone was locked in a locker. Beth bit down on the sheet, each contraction crashing through her. Sweat soaked her hair. Her vision blurred. She clung to one thought: Jim, and the baby fighting to be born. Hold on a little longer, sweetheart, please. When the pain peaked, she screamed, voice raw. Call Jim. Please, someone call him. A young nurse nodded and ran. Jim was hauling crates when his phone finally buzzed. A stranger's voice spoke fast. Are you James Franklin? Your wife's in labor, she's at the hospital. The world stopped. He dropped everything and ran out of the warehouse, into the storm. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching him as he sprinted across intersections, through red lights, lungs burning. Inside the hospital, Beth was wheeled into the delivery room. Bright lights, antiseptic air, shouts overlapping. 8 centimeters dilated. Get ready to push, Beth gasped, tears streaming. In her head, she heard her mother's voice. Don't let love be the reason you fall. She gripped the sheet and pushed. The pain tore through her like fire. Outside, Jim burst into the hallway just as the doctor shouted, the baby's crowning almost there. He stopped at the door, chest heaving, rain dripping from his hair. He heard her scream then, the cry of a newborn. A thin, trembling cry, but alive. Jim pressed his forehead to the wall, sobbing. Timothy, he whispered, welcome to the world. But then came the words that froze him. She's bleeding. Blood pressure dropping fast. Jim's face went pale. He slammed on the door. What's happening? No answer. Inside, everything spun. Beth's vision dimmed. Alarms blared. Postpartum hemorrhage, a doctor shouted. We need blood now. A nurse yelled. We're out of O negative in the unit. Beth's world blurred into light and sound. Someone shouted her name. Beth, stay with me. She smiled faintly, whispering, Jim, don't cry. I'm okay. Then the darkness swallowed her. When Beth opened her eyes, everything was white. The rhythmic beep of a monitor filled the silence. The air smelled of antiseptic. A trembling voice spoke beside her. Beth, can you hear me? She turned her head. Jim was there, unkempt beard, sleepless eyes, holding her hand to his lips. I thought I'd lost you. Her voice cracked. Where's the baby? Jim's tears spilled freely. Safe. Timothy's fine. The nurses say he's perfect. Beth smiled weakly. I want to see him. The doctor says soon. You need rest. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. In the haze between waking and sleep, she saw her mother standing by a window smiling, hand over her heart. You lived, Elizabeth. 3 days later, they placed Timothy in her arms for the first time. Tiny, pink, eyes closed, breathing softly against her chest. Jim stood beside her, gaze tender enough to break her. He has your eyes, she said. No, Jim whispered. He has yours, steady and brave. She chuckled, the kind of laugh that feels like prayer, all the pain and fear gone. But Jim's smile didn't reach his eyes. He held something back, a shadow. The hospital bills were piling up: blood transfusions, medication, and newborn care. He knew one missed payment could end everything they'd built. That night, Jim sat alone in the corridor, watching rain streak the glass. Beside him, an unopened envelope, the medical bill. He finally tore it open. The number hit him like a blow. He thought about calling his father, but then Beth's voice echoed in his head. I don't want anyone buying back your pride with money. He folded the paper again, slipped it back into his pocket, and stayed silent. Later, Beth woke and saw him asleep on the chair, still clutching that crumpled bill. She pulled it free, read it, and froze. She knew the storm wasn't over. It was only the beginning. She laid the paper on the table, looked at her sleeping baby, and whispered, My love, the world is harsh, but I promise, as long as I'm breathing, you will never be alone. The first sunlight of summer crept through the window, spilling gold over Beth and the tiny life in her arms. Jim stirred, looked up, and stopped to watch them, mother and child, framed in light. In that moment, he understood. The world could take everything from him, but not this, not the sight of love made flesh. breathing, crying, alive. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "Thank you for staying." Beth smiled faintly. "I promised, didn't I? I'm not leaving you." Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight bathed the city. And somewhere in that fragile hospital room, a new chapter began, uncertain, weary, but gloriously alive. 3 weeks after giving birth, Beth was discharged from the hospital. She was pale, weak, her stitches still tender, but there was no choice. They couldn't afford another night. Jim carried Timothy onto the bus while Beth followed slowly behind, clutching a small medicine bag. The air was strangely cold for late summer. A damp wind blew from Lake Michigan, curling between the high-rises. Beth pulled her coat tighter and looked at her baby in Jim's arms so tiny. She thought a strong gust could carry him away. They returned to the old apartment. No one was waiting. Beth's mother was gone. The room felt emptier than ever, with only an unmade bed and her photo resting on the small table, framed in dark wood. Beth stood still momentarily, then placed her hand on the photo. "Mom, I brought your grandson home." Jim wrapped an arm around her shoulders, saying nothing. From that day, life began again, but it wasn't the same life anymore. Beth still bled lightly, too weak to stand long. Jim took a few days off to care for her and the baby. Their savings were nearly gone. At night, he sat at the table staring at the stack of bills. The yellow light carved deep shadows into his tired face. Beth saw and whispered, "Jim, let me go back to work soon." He looked up sharply. "No, you're not healed yet. Let me handle it. You can't do it alone. You're exhausted. As long as I can breathe, I can handle it." Silence, only the baby's soft whimpering from the crib. Beth looked at her son, tears rising. "Jim, I'm scared." He reached for her hand. "Of what? That this world won't have space for us." Jim smiled faintly. "Then we'll make our own." That night, he stayed up soothing Timothy until dawn. The baby's breathing was shallow, his chest rising fast. Jim panicked, almost rushing him back to the hospital, but Beth stopped him. "It's okay, just a little fever. I know what to do." She pressed a warm cloth on the baby's forehead and began humming, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Sleep, my love. The night in Chicago is long, but your mother's here. Your father's here." Jim sat watching her under the soft lamp glow. At that moment, he understood that love wasn't kissed or promised. It was this, a trembling woman, sleepless, holding their child through the dark. A week later, he returned to the warehouse. The air was sharp, his breath fogging in front of him. He worked double shifts, from dawn to night. His calloused hands split open, his shoulders burned, and a dull ache started in his tooth. "It's nothing," he told himself, "just a toothache." But at night, the pain spread, throbbing so bad he couldn't sleep. Beth woke to find him hunched by the window, clutching his jaw. "Jim, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Just an infection. I'll be fine. Let me see." "It's okay, Jim." Her voice firmed. She saw his face swollen red and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh God, you need a doctor." "No money, Beth. You can't stay in pain like this." He gave a weak smile. "I can bear it. You and Timothy need the money more." That broke her. In their world, even pain had to wait its turn. 3 days later, he could no longer hide it. His fever spiked, his breathing grew labored, the swelling spread down his neck. Beth panicked and called the hospital, but the voice on the other end said flatly, "If you don't have insurance, emergency care will be expensive." She sat frozen, staring at her phone, hands shaking. She knew a number that could fix everything, Howard Franklin's. She typed half the digits, then stopped. "No, I can't." That night, Jim burned with fever. In his delirium, he mumbled, "I chose wrong, James." His mother's voice echoed in his dream. "Love doesn't feed anyone." He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Beth was rocking the baby, eyes red with sleeplessness. "Jim, you need a doctor." "I'm calling someone." "No, don't call anyone. You'll die. Then at least I'll die at home." Beth broke down, clutching him. "Don't say that. You promised to stay, remember?" He smiled faintly, hand trembling as he touched her cheek. "I remember. I keep my promises." Desperate, she ran downstairs to Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor. The woman hurried up with her medical bag, touched Jim's forehead, and gasped. "He's burning up. This is bad, Beth, sepsis." He needs a hospital now. We can't afford it. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled. I can. Take him. Go. They rushed Jim to the ER. The doctor spoke briskly. Septic infection. Another few hours and we'd have lost him. Beth went still. She watched them wheel him away and felt her heart collapse inside her chest. 3 hours later, he was moved to recovery. Beth sat by his bedside, holding his hand, her mouth dry. Jim, can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered. Beth, don't talk. Rest. I dreamed of your mother. She told me I have to live. Beth sobbed. Then do what she said. Days blurred. Doctors warned there might be brain damage from the high fever. Beth never left his side, leaving only to feed Timothy. Some nights she stared out the hospital window at the glittering cars below and whispered, "What did we do so wrong to deserve this price?" On the 11th morning, Jim opened his eyes. His gaze was cloudy, but his lips moved. Beth. She rushed to him, grabbing his hand. "You're awake. Jim, you're awake." He blinked slowly, smiled faintly. "Am I still alive?" Beth nodded, tears falling onto his hand. "You promised you'd stay." Timothy cried in the hall. Beth brought him over and placed the tiny bundle in Jim's arms. He looked down, tears spilling over. "Hey, little man, Daddy's home." Beth leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "We made it through the storm." Jim smiled, voice weak but sure, "And we're still holding hands." Outside, morning broke. Light poured through the window, soft and golden, like that first autumn day they met. Beth looked out, whispering not sure if to Jim, to her mother, or to herself. "We survived. And maybe that's enough to call it a miracle." After waking up, Jim suffered from temporary memory loss. Fragments of his past nights of rain, the hospital, his mother were wiped clean. He still remembered Beth, remembered Timothy, but sometimes he forgot where they'd met, even who he used to be. At first, Beth cared for her baby and the man learning to walk again. His hands trembled, his speech slurred, his steps wobbled. But every time he fell, he'd laugh and say, "Sorry, I'm being a burden again." Beth shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, you're teaching me patience." Timothy was 6 months old, then the only sunlight in that small apartment. Whenever he laughed, the exhaustion melted away. Jim practiced speaking to him, slowly, clumsily. "Tim, oh, thy." Beth giggled. "You said it wrong." "That's okay," he said, "as long as he understands." In the afternoons, when the light poured through the cracked window, Jim would sit on the wooden chair and read poems from second-hand books. Once, he read aloud, "Love is not a thing to fix the world. It's what makes the broken pieces still worth keeping." Beth looked up. "Do you understand it?" Jim nodded. "Yeah. It means even if we can't fix the world, we can still keep the part we love most." She smiled softly. "You don't have to remember your past, just remember that." Beth's mother rested peacefully in a small cemetery on the city's south side. One afternoon, Beth brought Jim and Timothy there, laying a bunch of wild daisies on the grave, the same kind he once picked for her. Jim stared at the stone for a long while, then whispered, "You're like her. Strong, but not because you wanted to be, you had no choice." Beth bowed her head. "I just hope our son never has to be strong that way." On the ride home, Jim took her hand. "I think we should get married." Beth turned, laughing. "Are you proposing to me in a taxi?" "Yeah. But this time, no diamond ring." Her smile faded into something softer. "I just want you healthy. That's enough. Then, we're getting married." 3 weeks later, they did inside the rehab center where Jim was still recovering. No white dress, no music. Beth wore a pale blue thrift store dress. Jim wore a wrinkled white shirt. Mrs. Chen signed as their witness, and the young nurse who'd helped deliver Timothy brought a small cake. They exchanged plastic toy rings, red stars on their fingers. The officiant asked, "Do you take her, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in pain?" Jim looked at Beth, voice trembling but clear. "I've already lived through all of that. So, yes." Beth's tears spilled over. "And I choose you again. And if there's another life, I'd choose you still." Their kiss wasn't fiery. It was gentle, real. Applause echoed down the hall. Timothy giggled from his stroller. And right there, in a place built for recovery and loss, love spoke. They moved to a small ground-floor apartment in the southern suburbs 2 years later. There are 2 rooms, and one window faces a patch of grass. But it was theirs, their first real home. Jim worked part-time at a community library. His memory wasn't perfect, but he still loved books, still remembered how to shelve them alphabetically. Beth returned to the hospital, working day shifts. Timothy started preschool, curly-haired, bright-eyed, always asking, "Mom, why does Dad walk slower than other people?" Beth smiled. "Because he's learning to walk slow enough not to leave anyone behind." At night, they ate together at their small wooden table. Sometimes Jim told bedtime stories. Sometimes Beth just watched them laugh. One evening, after Timothy fell asleep, Jim turned on their old radio and found "Fly Me to the Moon." Beth laughed. "You still remember that song?" "Not really," he said. "But every time I hear it, my heart feels calm." She rested her head on his shoulder. "That was the song you first kissed me to." Jim squeezed her hand. "Then from now on, it's ours." Outside, the season's first snow fell. The light from their window glowed on the glass, turning the flakes gold. Beth looked at their sleeping son and whispered, "I think I finally understand." "Understand what?" "That happiness isn't the absence of pain. It's choosing to love even when you know it'll hurt." Jim smiled. "You always sound like a writer. And you always make me believe in things I thought I'd outgrown." They fell silent. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the stove's warmth, the steady breath of a child, and two worn hands still intertwined. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and maybe they didn't need to. The next morning, Beth opened the window. Sunlight spilled onto the table where their wedding photo sat, two people grinning foolishly in a hospital room. Timothy ran circles around them, hugging his stuffed bear. "Mom, Dad, the snow's white." Jim laughed, pulling on his coat, still walking slowly but steadily. Beth watched him and felt a peace she couldn't name. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, maybe to life itself, "We survived. And that's the greatest miracle of all." From the neighbor's radio, "Fly Me to the Moon" played again. Beth closed her eyes, smiling. Sometimes, miracles aren't what we wait for. They're the moments we're already living. When love, though scarred, still chooses to stay. And if you've listened this far, thank you, honestly. Beth and Jim's story has no magic, no fairy tale ending. Every time I see them smile, I remember what you once said. People only grow up when they learn not to hurt loved ones. I finally understand. Thank you for everything. One day, if you ever hear about a program that teaches men how to be kind, I hope you'll smile, because you're the reason it exists. Wishing you peace. Adam. Binta folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. No tears, no trembling, just a soft, steady breath closing the last page of a once painful book.